Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, today is April 9th, 2025. It is the 160th anniversary of the day that Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant. It is not the end of the Civil War, though it effectively is the first major step in that direction over the coming weeks. But it's typically remembered as the day that everyone celebrated the end of the war, or the beginning of the end of the war. I was hoping to be in Appomattox for this event, but with all of my other travel, I just had to make some cuts somewhere, and unfortunately, being in Appomattox ended up having to be cut from my schedule. But I do want to talk about it, and I was looking for the perfect video to do that with, and believe it or not, what I stumbled upon was over on Lionheart Filmworks. And this is actually a video that was made for the 125th anniversary of Lee's surrender back in 1990. So it's got that old kind of grainy VHS quality to it, but it's actually a reenact. It's kind of a docudrama like the modern stuff we see on the History Channel and other places, where they're actually acting it out while they're telling us what happened. And I thought it would be the perfect way to kind of break down and talk about the events that unfolded on that incredibly historic day. So I'll put the link down in the description so you can check it out if you want to without my commentary, but let's go ahead and dive into this one. Oh yeah, it's got that old school feel here. Had a lot of these videos growing up. I've never been to Appomattox. I was really looking forward to being there.
Colonel Marshall rode into town and asked the first civilian he saw to assist him in finding a place for Lee and Grant to meet. By an incredible coincidence, that civilian turned out to be Wilmer McLean, a local businessman who had once owned a farm near Manassas. In 1861, the Battle of Bull Run had raged over his fields, and sometime in 1862, he purchased the house in Appomattox, promising his family that here the sound of battle will never reach you.
And that was a fair assumption to make. If you look at a map and you look at where Appomattox is, no reasonable person would have concluded that the war would have ended up there. Everybody expected it to go on in that corridor between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, which is where almost all of the Eastern Theater fighting is taking place, at least between the major armies. It's just in this aftermath of the fall of Richmond and Petersburg that Lee is moving west to try and put some distance between him and Grant, and eventually turn south and link up with Joe Johnston. And yeah, it's just one of those weird coincidences that he just runs into a guy who had lived on the Manassas battlefield a few years earlier. It could have just as easily been anybody else that they ran into that day.
But the war had found him again, and what had started in his front yard was about to end in his front room. Yeah. A short while later, Lee, in company with Babcock and Sergeant Tucker, arrives at the house. Lee is splendidly dressed in a new uniform with sash, gloves, polished boots, and a magnificent sword.
And this is such a perfect encapsulation of the difference between Robert E. Lee and then what you'll see with Grant. Lee is this scion of aristocracy, of that kind of upper class Virginia family. He comes from the Lees. These are wealthy Virginia planters, and Grant is literally from, they use the term hardscrabble, which is the name he used for his farm in Missouri that he had for a while. Grant literally is, he's a tanner's son. He has grown up kind of getting everything for himself and really going after it. And he's working class, and he's risen because of his own merits and not because of who his father was. I wonder if there's a higher. Nope, 720 is as high as it goes. I guess that's what we had back then.
About 30 minutes later, Grant arrives with several members of his staff, including the Chief of Cavalry, Philip Sheridan.
Yeah, you can see the guy that's playing Sheridan right there. Sheridan had a very distinct kind of hat that he wore, and he was called Little Phil because he wasn't very tall. He's shorter than Napoleon.
Chief of Staff John Rawlins, Inspector General Seth Williams, his adjutant Theodore Bowers, an aide Horace Porter, and his military secretary Eli Parker, a full-blooded Native American.
Seneca Indian, yeah. Eli Parker is such a cool aspect of this story, and I'm sure they're going to talk about his interaction with Lee when he gets in there. But Grant's staff is such an interesting mix of people, and he's also got, among his staff, he's got Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of President Lincoln. Lincoln desperately wanted to be involved in the war. He knew that was all anything was going to matter after the war was whether you served. And he was tucked safely away at Harvard during most of the war, and he insisted on having a role, so Lincoln gets him a place on Grant's staff. John Rawlins is probably as responsible as anyone for getting Grant into the war in the first place. They cross paths in Illinois, and he convinces Grant that he needs to step up and do something and get involved. And that's why Grant ends up getting a commission to get back into the Army, because he had resigned from the Army several years earlier. Rawlins is also probably the guy most responsible for keeping Grant off the bottle as much as possible during the war. And he's going to become Grant's Secretary of War under his first term, even though he ends up dying of illness. And he's buried right there in front of Lee's house at Arlington.
In contrast to Lee, Grant wears a casual sack coat, no sword or gloves, and mud-spattered boots. As they mount the steps, Grant motions to his staff to wait outside while he greets Lee inside. Their first moments together set the tone for the talks to come.
What a moment. What a moment in history.
I met you once before, General Lee, while we were serving in Mexico. You came over from General Scott's headquarters to visit Garland's brigade, to which I then belonged. I've always remembered your appearance, and I think I should have recognized you anywhere.
Yes, I know I met you on that occasion, and I've often thought of it and tried to recall how you looked, but I have never been able to remember a single feature.
So Lee, he's famous for this white hair that we see in the pictures, but at the beginning of the war, he actually still had pretty dark hair. But we don't really have a lot of photographs of him to be able to kind of see the difference.
Grant is somewhat stung by this mild insult.
Awkward moment.
But the two men continue to discuss the Mexican War while Grant's staff files in.
And I'm not sure that Lee intended it as a slight. I think it just probably came across that way. But you also got to remember, Lee in this point is, just imagine what he must be feeling. He has put everything into this war. He's actually just lost a child. A lot of these generals lost children back home, adult children in Lee's case. Longstreet had a couple of children who died. Sherman did as well. But he's overwhelmed by the grief and the sadness and the sense of defeat and probably some fear of what's going to happen not only to him but the people that are important to him in the aftermath of all of this.
With them is a civilian newspaper correspondent, Sylvanus Cadwallader. Grant is stalling with this talk of Mexico. Lee decides to get the meeting down to the business
let's
at
get
hand.
it over with.
I suppose, General Grant, the object of our present meeting is fully understood. I asked to see you to ascertain upon what conditions you would receive the surrender of my army.
And I guess they're probably not going to show it, but there's actually an interaction that happens between Lee and Eli Parker, the Seneca Indian, where he says something to the effect of, well, at least I see there's one real American here, meaning because he's Native American. And Eli Parker snaps back with, sir, we are all Americans here.
The terms I propose are those as stated substantially in my letter of yesterday. That is, the officers and men surrendered to be paroled, disqualified from taking up arms again until properly exchanged. And all arms, ammunition, and supplies are to be delivered up as captured property.
And so he's giving him terms. Remember, this is the guy who's famous for being unconditional surrender Grant. But his two greatest victories of the war in terms of bagging a Confederate army involve giving terms. You have Vicksburg, and then you have Appomattox. And in both cases, they are very generous terms that are given to the armies.
Those are about the conditions I expected would be proposed.
Yes, I think our correspondence has indicated pretty clearly the action to be taken at our meeting today. But I hope it may lead to a general suspension of hostilities and be the means of preventing any further loss of life.
I presume, General Grant, we have both considered the proper steps to be taken. I would suggest that you formally commit to writing the terms you have proposed so that they may be formally acted upon.
So understand at this point, both of these men are the generals-in-chief of their opposing sides in this war. Grant's the overall commander of all Union forces. Lee has just recently been given overall command of all Confederate forces, but it's too late. But that said, this surrender, in as far as Lee's concerned, is just the Army of Northern Virginia. It's just the maybe 20,000 men that he's got left under his command that haven't already been captured. I think on paper it's officially like 29,000, but he's lost so many in the weeks leading up to this at places, like Five Forks, where thousands and thousands of Confederates are captured. But Grant's hoping to kind of make it bigger than that, but Lee just acknowledges he doesn't really have the authority to do that.
Very well. I'll write them out.
Taking his order book from Theodore Bowers, Grant pauses momentarily and then proceeds to write out the terms in pencil.
Each company or regimental commander sign a like parole for the men of their commands.
And if you go to the website of the National Park Service for Appomattox, they actually have a searchable database of every man in the Confederate Army under Lee that was granted a certificate of parole during this. And this includes, I've been doing some research for a friend of mine whose third great-grandfather was one of the men who surrendered, 7th Georgia, I think he was in. He was in every battle going all the way back to the first Battle of Bull Run.
The arms, artillery, and public property to be parked and stacked.
As he writes, Grant glances over at the beautiful sword that Lee is wearing and spontaneously decides to permit all the officers in Lee's army to retain their sidearms.
It doesn't sound like a big deal, but like surrendering your sidearm, either your pistol or your sword, was like a symbolic means of surrender. And by saying you can keep your sidearm, it was actually a way of showing a degree of humility in the surrender, that you're not going to gloat over your enemy.
Generous concession designed to spare Lee the further humiliation of surrendering his sword, as is the custom in these circumstances.
This will not embrace the sidearms of the officers, nor their private horses or baggage. This done.
That was huge too, because this, again, by saying you can keep your horse and your private baggage, can't keep your slaves, was a way of saying we want you to go back with what you came with. We want you to go back to your farm and go back to your life that you had before the war. We are all Americans again, and we need to move on. And this was something that Grant and Lincoln had talked about, the idea, let them up easy, that it's not about hangings and retribution, that this is about restoration.
Each officer and man will be allowed to return to their homes, not to be disturbed by United States authority, so long as they observe their paroles and the laws in force where they may reside.
This is really
magnanimous
stuff. When he
finishes, Grant hands the book to Parker, who passes it to General Lee. As Grant had done earlier, now Lee seems to stall. He carefully and deliberately sets the book down. He takes out his glasses. He meticulously and slowly cleans them with his handkerchief. Then he picks up the book and begins to read.
Rolls of all the officers and men to be made in duplicate. One copy to be given to an officer designated by me. The other to be retained by such officer or officers as you.
As Lee reads, he notices an omission in the text and points it out.
After the words "until properly," the word "exchange" seems to be omitted. You doubtless intended to use that word.
Why, yes, I thought I had put in exchanged.
I presumed it had been omitted inadvertently, and with your permission, I will mark where it should be inserted.
Certainly.
Lee searches for a pencil, but finds he does not have one.
I know
Grant's
that feeling.
aide, Horace Porter, immediately comes to his rescue
It's so cool that we have all these little details of this, but you have to understand everybody in that room knew what a momentous occasion this was. And so they, if you're in a moment like that, you're remembering every little thing. You're thinking about that, and then you're probably writing home about it just this first chance you get when you get out of there.
Offering him one of his own. Lee makes his correction and continues reading. When he finishes, Lee looks up, relieved.
This will have a very happy effect upon my Army.
Unless you have some suggestions to make in regard to the form in which I've stated the terms, I will have a copy made in ink and sign it.
And notice he said the form. In other words, you're not making any changes to the essence of what we're doing, to the actual details. If you have any problem with the wording, with the form, fine.
There is one thing I would like to mention. The cavalrymen and artillerists own their own horses in our Army. Its organization differs in that respect from the United States. I would like to understand whether these men will be permitted to retain their horses.
Yeah, let them.
You will find the terms as written do not allow this. Only officers are permitted to keep their private property.
No, I see the terms do not allow it. That is clear.
This causes some consternation among Grant's staff, as such a concession was clearly beyond the normal scope of acceptable surrender terms. Without asking directly, Lee has put Grant on the spot. Grant compromises.
This subject is quite new to me. Of course, I didn't know that any private soldiers own their animals. I will not change the terms as written, but I will instruct the officers I shall appoint to receive the paroles to let all the men who claim to own a horse or a mule take that animal home with them to work their little farms.
Grant is, if you've never taken the time to study Ulysses S. Grant, please get a book like Ron Chernow's Grant, or read Grant's memoirs himself. One of my favorite human beings in American history. He's a really just compassionate, kind guy. He's not perfect. I mean, nobody in history is perfect. I'm not trying to spin him as this perfect angel and this wonderful guy who never did anything wrong and never said anything stupid, never made bad choices. But this is completely inconsistent. This is completely consistent with the character of Grant, as I understand him.
This will have the best possible effect upon my men. It will be very gratifying and will do much towards conciliating our people.
Yeah. See, even Lee at this point is thinking, okay, we need to think about what's next and how best to move forward.
Marshall returns the book to Grant, who hands it to Bowers and directs him to copy it in ink. Bowers is too nervous to comply, however, and Grant passes it to Eli Parker instead.
Yep.
Parker finds that McLean's ink bottle has become thickened and cannot be used. As Porter had done for Lee, Marshall now comes to the rescue and steps forward with a pen and ink and loans it to Parker to permit the final document to be written. Lee then instructs Marshall to draft a formal acceptance letter. Outside, a small group of curious townspeople has gathered in the street, aware that something momentous is taking place, and a steady stream of federal dispatch riders and messengers are coming and going as the meeting progresses. Thundering up the road comes George Custer, the impetuous cavalryman, who had earlier that day confronted James Longstreet in a stormy exchange. Far exceeding his authority, Custer had demanded the unconditional surrender of the Confederate Army, and Longstreet had sent him on his way brusquely.
Custer at this point is like in his early 20s. He just graduated West Point right when the war was starting. He had been a staff officer for McClellan. He gets promoted from captain all the way up to brigadier general, and you're already seeing kind of the flashes of who he is. It made him both a great cavalry commander, but also a liability on the battlefield, which of course we will see in 1876.
Now he arrives late to the meeting and is forced to remain outside on the porch. Inside, the documents are completed, and the formal acceptance is being signed. No single surrender document is drawn up, but the terms are proposed and accepted in the form of dispatches from each side to the other. When both are signed and exchanged, the surrender is complete. But Lee is not quite finished with Grant yet.
I have 1,000 or more of your men as prisoners, General Grant, a number of them being officers whom we have required to march along with us the last several days. I would be glad to send them into your lines as soon as it could be arranged, for I have no provisions for them. I have indeed nothing for my own men.
Yeah, and this was another really important moment here, is that, and the same thing happened after Vicksburg, that you have this scene in Vicksburg where right on the day of the surrender, you have Union soldiers reaching into their own provisions and handing some of them over to Confederate soldiers, and Grant's going to make allowance for this and immediately send over several days worth of rations for Lee's army.
They have been living for the past several days principally upon parched corn, and we are badly in need of both rations and forage. I telegraphed to Lynchburg requesting several train loads of rations to be sent on by rail from there. And when they arrive, I would be glad to have the present wants of my men supplied from them.
Grant's staff is astonished. Sheridan's cavalry had captured the very trains Lee is referring to the night before. They cannot believe that Lee does not know this, yet he seems to be implying just that.
Yeah, there's no way he could have known that, because he doesn't have the instant communication. His army's in disarray. Sheridan has been sent to get out and get around and get behind Lee, so all of this is happening so fast.
Lee was maneuvering Grant into one additional concession. Once again, Grant rises to the occasion.
I should like to have our men sent within our lines as soon as possible. I will take steps to have your army supplied with provisions. I'm sorry, but we have no forage for the animals. We have had to depend on the country for our own supply of forage. Of about how many men does your present force consist?
Indeed, I am not able to say. We have had heavy losses in killed and wounded, and there have been some stragglers and deserters.
Suppose I send over 25,000 rations. Do you think that's sufficient?
I think it will be ample, and it will be a great relief, I assure you.
With the formalities concluded, Lee departs the house. He pauses at the top of the stairs and slaps his gloves in his hand 3 times.
If you watch pretty much every, I mean, there's a number of TV shows and movies over the years that have portrayed this scene. The movie Lincoln, you've got The Blue and the Gray, North and South, movies like that, and all of them show that same scene where he comes out the door, he puts his hat on, and he slaps his hand. And then the horse comes around, he gets on the horse, and then you have this powerful moment where Grant comes either partway down the stairs or all the way down the stairs, raises his hat in acknowledgement of Lee.
Then he descends the steps with Marshall and the Union generals following. As they turn to leave, Grant silently raises his hat in salute, and his staff follows his lead. Lee returns the salute and rides off slowly to rejoin his army.
What a moment. What a moment. And understand, too, and I'm sure they're going to show this because we're only halfway through the video, Grant has this incredible reunion with James Longstreet. He and Longstreet had served together. Longstreet was present at Grant's wedding. Longstreet was actually Grant's wife's cousin. So they know each other. They're good friends, and they're going to have a reunion in this, too.
Grant and his officers watch the departure with a mixture of sadness and relief. For Lee and his men, there can be only one emotion. Their country is defeated.
Yeah.
Their dreams of independence shattered. Their homes and countryside ravaged. Many of their comrades gone forever. The future holds only darkness and suffering. As Lee returns to his lines, his men surround him, asking if they are surrendered. Lee rides forward, alone in his sorrow, and the bravery of his ragged men only sadden him further.
He, before all of this, had said, I guess there's nothing left for me to do but to go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths. So that gives you a sense of what Lee was feeling in all of this.
He knows what lies ahead, and his heart goes out to them.
Whatever you think of their cause, you still have to understand what they were feeling in this moment. You know, the overwhelming sadness. When you fight for something, when your buddies and your brothers and your friends have died for something only to fail, there's an overwhelming sadness to that.
There are some units who choose not to surrender their flags. The 14th South Carolina Regiment elects to bury their colors in an emotional ceremony rather than give them up.
I get it.
The Federals have a very different reaction. When General Meade gets the news, he climbs from his ambulance, leaps on a horse, and rides the line shouting the news. The men's response is indescribable.
War is over, boys!
Interestingly, in all of this, Grant that morning woke up with a nasty migraine. It wasn't a hangover. He got bad migraines, and it was debilitating. And he said the instant he got the news that Lee wanted to surrender, the migraine was gone. Also understandable reaction.
On April 12, 1865, 4 years to the day from the firing on Fort Sumter, the Union 5th Corps, led by Joshua Chamberlain, the hero of Little Round Top at Gettysburg, marches into the streets of Appomattox Courthouse to receive the surrender of Lee's men.
So Chamberlain at this point has been wounded 6 times. So go back up a minute here. Gettysburg is the only battle that Chamberlain leads the 20th Maine. The only one. Because just before the Battle of Gettysburg, Adelbert Ames, who was the commanding officer, the colonel of the 20th Maine, had been promoted to command a brigade in the 11th Corps. He actually ends up commanding a division at Gettysburg because Francis Barlow gets wounded. So Chamberlain becomes the colonel of the 20th Maine just before Gettysburg. After the Battle of Gettysburg in August of 1863, he's going to be promoted to command a brigade. And then he's eventually going to rise up and command a division, but he gets wounded badly at battles like Petersburg, so much so that he gets a battlefield promotion to brigadier general, His obituary is published back home in Maine, but he does survive, and he ends up a division commander and a brevet major general. And yet he's given the honor of being the official officer for the Union overseeing the surrender, where the Confederate soldiers are going to march in, they're going to stack their arms, surrender their colors, and this is when we get one of the most incredible moments of the entire war for me that happens between him and John Gordon.
The 13,000 veterans march silently to their duty. They have seen years of vicious combat with the men they are about to face, and they keep their thoughts to themselves. Years later, Chamberlain recorded his thoughts about the sight of these battle-scarred units filing by with the measured tread of professional soldiers.
Great memories and great thoughts went forward. We formed along a principal street to face the last line of battle and receive the arms and colors of that great army. We were remnants also. Massachusetts, Maine, Michigan, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York. Veterans and replaced veterans, cut to pieces, cut down, consolidated, divisions into brigades, regiments into one.
The Union men have not long to wait before the Gray Legions begin to appear. The 25,000 remnants of the Army of Northern Virginia march in without drums or music to their final formation. In the front of the lead division is John B. Gordon. As his column approaches the waiting Federals, Chamberlain orders the Yankees to go to the position of carry arms, the sign of salute.
Awesome.
Gordon returns the salute, and his men march in with heads held high and their ragged banners flying proudly.
John Gordon, years later, would refer to Joshua Chamberlain as the knightliest soldier in the Federal Army because of all of this. In fact, I want to actually take a minute, because it doesn't look like they're going to give Gordon's thoughts. I want to read exactly how Gordon described this scene, because it's really powerful. So it was actually Chamberlain's reminiscence that I'm remembering here. So I want to read it, what Chamberlain says. It's incredible. Before us in proud humiliation, think about that, stood the embodiment of manhood. Men whom neither toils and sufferings, nor the fact of death, nor disaster, nor hopelessness could bend from their resolve, standing before us now, thin, worn, and famished, but erect, and with eyes looking level into ours, waking memories that bound us together as no other bond. Was not such manhood to be welcomed back into a union so tested and assured? With my staff, I was on the extreme right of the line, mounted on horseback, and in a position nearest the rebel soldiers who were approaching our right. Ah, but it was a most impressive sight, a most striking picture, to see that whole army in motion to lay down the symbols of war and strife. That army which had fought for 4 terrible years. The momentous meaning of this occasion impressed me deeply. I resolved to mark it by some token of recognition, which could be no other than a salute of arms. When General Gordon came opposite me, I had the bugle blown and the entire line came to attention. Gordon, at the head of the column, riding with heavy spirit and downcast face, catches the sound of shifting arms, looks up, and, taking the meaning, wheels superbly, making with himself and his horse one uplifted figure, with profound salutation as he drops the point of his sword to the boot toe. Then, facing to his own command, gives word for his successive brigades to pass us with the same position of the manual, honor answering honor. And it says here, of course, many years later, Gordon in his own memoirs called Chamberlain one of the knightliest soldiers in the Federal Army. Now, I have read that there are some who question this and say, well, Chamberlain didn't write about it till years later, But I have no reason to think that it didn't happen this way. And Gordon never disputed it. And to my knowledge, no one else who was there ever disputed Chamberlain's recollection of the facts that day. What a moment that must have been to witness.
Shortly before the formal surrender of arms, Lee had sent a farewell message to each of the units that was read to them by their commanding officers. No doubt for many of them, the words rang in their hearts as they stacked their weapons for the last time.
After 4 years of arduous service, marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources. I need not tell the brave survivors of so many hard-fought battles who have remained steadfast to the last that I have consented to the result from no distrust of them, but feeling that valor and devotion could accomplish nothing that would compensate for the loss that may have attended the continuation of the contest.
So it's powerful to listen to those words, because what Lee's telling his men is, we're not surrendering because your heart's no longer in this. We're surrendering because we have no choice. There's just too many men, too much material, too much resource being thrown at us. There's no point to continue to die needlessly in a cause we can't win.
I determined to avoid the useless sacrifice of those whose past services have endeared them to their countrymen. By the terms of the agreement, officers and men can return to their homes and remain until exchange. You will take with you the satisfaction that proceeds from the consciousness of duty faithfully performed. And I earnestly pray that a merciful God will extend to you his blessings and protection. With an unceasing admiration for your constancy and devotion to your country, and a grateful remembrance of your kind and generous considerations for myself, I bid you all an affectionate farewell.
The condition of many of Lee's men is pitiful. Their battle flags are grouped tightly together as the fractional pieces of regiments march only a few feet apart. Many are wearing only fragments of uniforms. General Gordon described the sight. Men were wholly unfit for duty, in worn-out shoes and ragged uniforms, but with proud mien, they challenged the admiration of the brave victors. When the proud and sensitive sons of Dixie came to a full realization of the truth, they could no longer control their emotions, and tears ran down their shrunken faces. Chamberlain also recognized the sense of camaraderie that the Yankees felt for their defeated brethren.
Before us, in proud humiliation, stood the embodiment of manhood. Men whom neither toil and suffering, nor the fact of death, nor disaster, nor hopelessness could bend from their resolve. Standing before us now, thin, worn, and famished, but erect, with eyes looking level into ours, waking memories that bound us together as no other bond. Was not such manhood to be welcomed back into a union so tested and assured?
This idea of manhood is something Chamberlain wrote a lot about, because there's a scene, and I actually did a video about this from the Gettysburg battlefield, where he has this sergeant under his command that was killed at Gettysburg, and his name was George Buck, and it was a very similar thing. He talks about his honorable manhood, and he talks about his blood being poured out for his country. And Chamberlain's a college professor. He's, among other things, a professor of rhetoric. It's this idea of using words to describe scenes, and he's a master of that.
For days, the printing and distributing of paroles goes on. Lee's men drift away in groups and by themselves. For weeks, they will be journeying home. They know there is little to return to, but return they must. The proud brigades of the Army of Northern Virginia melt away into the countryside. Although the rifles of the soldiers are empty and silent, there is one weapon that is still to be fired. The evening of April the 14th, President Abraham Lincoln attends a play at Ford's Theater.
All right, so the rest of the video just talks about Lincoln's assassination and some of the aftermath of that, but we really just wanted to talk about the surrender today. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned a few things. It's a powerful moment in American history, definitely one worth remembering. So I hope you will take some time to learn on your own about that day and about the events that led up to it. Thanks for watching.